Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jocelyn. So in the last video, hopefully you tuned into that one because I talked all about the narcissistic family dynamic, and it's really key and important that you watch that video before this one because it's going to really lay out the foundation. It's going to really make sense of everything that I'm about to go over in this video. You guys are probably wondering so far, why am I just sitting here calling everyone a narcissist? And there's a very particular reason. The narcissistic family dynamic that I went over is literally the psychological dynamic that is everywhere in our society. It's the mask or the grandiose image that we all kind of put on when we get into those low vibrational states when it comes to shame, guilt, and fear. When we start thinking those thoughts that trigger those exact brain chemicals within us, then it's going to automatically set up this dynamic. That's what I'm going to be going over in this video, how that structure is everywhere in society. Whenever you're thinking shameful, guiltful, fearful thoughts, it's such a low vibrational energy that automatically what comes with that type of thought structure, those low vibrational thoughts, you will be attracting situations to you that completely mirror the narcissistic family dynamic. So that's why it's so important to think positive thoughts, to think really high vibrational positive thoughts. That's the only real way to liberate yourself from these shameful, guiltful thoughts that create this dynamic in the first place. The whole scapegoat, golden child, and narcissistic parent type of dynamic. That's why I'm saying everyone is narcissistic to some degree. It's not at all to like start pointing the finger. It's a fact in all of us, and the only real way to confront that is to integrate that part of ourselves, to not be ashamed of it anymore. Because whenever you shame it, you're falling back into that trap of falling into what I call a shame cycle. You'll do things that are against what your inner being or what your intuition says is good for you. Like say eating something. Your intuition is saying not to eat, but the shameful, guiltful part of you that's literally stored within the cells of your body puts you in this shame cycle where you will do something different than what your intuition wants, and then you will shame yourself for doing something different. So again, that will create more of a brain chemical release and store more of that brain chemical in the cells in your body because, right, the receptors on your cells are creating even more receptors that will take on that specific chemical that you're releasing from your brain. More than likely, if you're drawn to this video, you are a light worker and you are on this path of awakening, of, raising your vibration, of becoming more conscious and, making a difference in the world, going out and helping people. And that's what the path that we're all on as light workers. This will really help to clarify those painful experiences that we keep attracting and why they happen in the first place. So more than likely, if you're watching this, you're a light worker or an empath or someone more along a spiritual path that's looking for answers to maybe painful experiences in the past. With all that being said, let's talk about the whole societal structure. So we talked about with the narcissistic family dynamic, kind of what happens there. We've got the narcissistic parent and, maybe a more passive parent, but they're probably going to be narcissistic themselves, just maybe a little bit covert. And then they psychologically set up this dynamic where there's a scapegoat, which usually, more than often, an empath or a light worker is going to fall into this category of being the scapegoat in the family. And then there's also the golden child or the bully in the family who's going to be a little bit more charismatic, gets their way, they have a little bit more say and power than the scapegoat in the family. This is where I want to merge into how this dynamic is actually set up in society as well. And I'm gonna kind of let you guys decide for yourself who in our society would be the narcissistic parent, who has control over everyone and everything and kind of runs the show and is pretty like controlling and semi-abusive in a lot of ways. So I'm just gonna throw that out there and you guys decide for yourself who that could be. But I'm gonna specifically start naming some things in society that would represent or could represent the golden children or the bullies, and then also who could represent the scapegoat. Our judicial system. So even if you look at, so we know that narcissists operate from the low vibrational emotions of shame, guilt, and fear. And the thing that's really fascinating is there's an actual guilty verdict in our judicial system when you go to court. And think about how fearful and intimidating it is when you have to go to court in the first place. Say, for example, if someone is suing you, there's a lot of fear that's behind having to do that in the first place. So then we have, say, for example, the Army Reserves or our Navy or Air Force. That in and of itself is kind of like a power or a golden child or bully in our society. They're actually very intimidating. And I kind of follow those along the lines as well as policemen. I'm not making a generalization where anyone that's in the Army or in the police academy, anything of that nature, I'm not making a generalization and saying that they're all narcissists or anything. I'm just saying that us as a whole, the structure that we have set up, so the actual entities and organizations in and of themselves, like policemen, is all set up based off of the emotions of shame, guilt, and fear, okay? But these ones tend to fall a little bit more in the golden children or the bully category because they kind of run around intimidating us like smaller people, you know? Laws were put in place in the very first place out of fear, you know, to keep people in line. So kind of think about it in that way. The next one I want to bring up is, say, for example, doctors and pharmaceutical companies. So psychologically, this in and of itself has been set up to kind of lead people away from their own guidance system. And that's the other reason why I want to bring these all to light, is because anything in society, any type of structure that guides you away from your own inner being, away from your own intuition and your own inner guidance, is not something that you should listen to. I'm going to say straight up. If your intuition is telling you something different than, say, what a doctor or a pharmaceutical company is telling you to ingest and take into your body, always, 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 always listen to your intuition. The more you're able to do that, the more you can trust yourself rather than going out and trusting other people to have answers for you. Now, the other one I want to bring up is like our education system. The highly educated in our society, people that have an impressive resume or have a degree or a piece of paper that says that they have all of this knowledge, they tend to be taken more seriously in our society. I kind of classify them to maybe possibly fall under the golden child or the bully category, because they are undermining people from their own intuition just by having a piece of paper that says differently. For people to come out and start telling other people how to live their lives, it again goes against everything as far as following your inner guidance, following your intuition, following that little voice inside of you that tells you to go in this direction or that direction. Hollywood or the entertainment industry. Now, the reason why I bring them up as possibly being a golden child or a bully in our society is that they, again, kind of have these special privileges that not a lot of people have. When you go back to kind of the things I've talked about in my previous videos, as far as like people having a grandiose image and then hiding their shame, guilt, and fear underneath that grandiose image, Hollywood and the entertainment industry is a great example of that. They have all of these abusive things that's going on behind the scenes, you know, all these sexual scandals that are coming up and coming out into the light currently. And it's completely covered up by all this glamour and, you know, makeup and having the nicest clothes, like all these designer things. Religion has this whole kind of psychological setup where they tell people they have like all this shame, guilt, and fear in and of their organization. So they shame people for maybe doing something against the religion, you know, maybe going out and drinking or doing things like that nature, or like having sex outside of marriage. Like there's all of these very shameful things in religion. So technically, and like I said, I'm going to make another video on this, that it's a whole like kind of narcissistic structure in and of itself, where they have scapegoats and golden children even inside the organization. We have this whole psychological structure that all of us have contributed to setting up, all with our observation. That if we were raised with the emotions of shame, guilt, and fear, then psychologically what will happen is this setup happens in the first place. This whole scapegoat and golden child dynamic will completely happen based off of the low vibrational emotions of shame, guilt, and fear. So the next one I'm going to briefly talk about is what would be considered the scapegoats in our society, or the shameful things in society, or the things that are a little bit more ostracized in our society. Kind of going back to that same exact family dynamic that we talked about in the first place, that we were all raised with on some level or spectrum. Homeless people. People might end up in these type of situations because more than likely they were in a scapegoat type of position being raised. So you can kind of see that in our society, being homeless is a little bit more shameful and feared. You know, a lot of people are afraid of homeless people. They have all these preconceived notion about people that are homeless. They're all on drugs, or, you know, they've made all these blanket statements and generalizations about people that are homeless, people that have been in jail or prison. In our society, it's actually extremely shameful for you to have been through jail or prison. We send them through the judicial system, right? We give them a guilty verdict, right? And narcissists operate from shame, guilt, and fear. And then we send them into prison, where even in and of itself in prison, there's a whole dynamic, a whole narcissistic dynamic inside there. Then when people come out of that facility, there's all this shame put on them. You know, we slap that label on them that they're an ex-convict or something, and then they're immediately feared by a lot of people. It's mental health disorders. There's actually a lot of psychologists and therapists that I've come across in my own experience that refuse to work with people that have certain mental health diagnoses, because there's actually all this shame that is on people with a diagnosis, like say narcissistic personality disorder, or even to be classified as a psychopath or a sociopath. There's actually a lot of shame and fear around that. So again, we are just projecting our own shame, guilt, and fear on people that have those labels. Not a lot of people are very comfortable when this comes up, but people with sexually transmitted diseases are completely shamed in our society. When people like have AIDS, I mean, you have to think about the people that have these diagnoses. They're usually so ashamed that they're very quiet about it, and they tend to sometimes not get the help that they need because there's so much sexual shame. And that kind of leads into my next one as well, is how shameful we are about our bodies, like how shameful sex is in and of itself, how taboo it is. And that goes along with the whole sexually transmitted disease. And that's why if you think about like AIDS, when that very first came out, people were bringing light to that. I always think it's really interesting that immediately the people that they place the blame or, you know, shamed for bringing that illness out in the first place into our society is gay people. And that's what also leads me into the LGBTQ community, which is another example of someone or something that is shameful or ostracized or kind of like taboo in our society. And the great thing is that that's slowly changing. At the same time, that's completely unacceptable. A lot of people are just projecting their own shame, guilt, and fear when they come across people that identify as like a different gender, or that, you know, they are transgender and identify as something different than they were born with. And not only that, just to have an attraction to the same sex, it's completely shameful. People are afraid of it, legit afraid of people like that. And that's why there's so many issues that are coming to light where people are shamed for having that type of sexual orientation in the first place. People who do drugs. And we all know that there's like this huge war on drugs right now, you know, it has been for a long time. But people that do drugs, there's actually a lot of shame, guilt, and fear that comes along with that in the first place when people come out and say that. And that in particular is why we're having such an issue legalizing marijuana. There's so much shame and fear based around that. So again, it kind of goes back to just what we were raised with. Literally a chemical. Those low vibrational emotions of shame, guilt, and fear are literally a chemical stored in the cells of you, and it's being projected when you shame, guilt, and fear anything or anyone in society for being different in any way. And so drugs is a very big one. Actually, the thing I think it's really fascinating is I read an article about somewhere in the UK, where they're actually legalizing really hardcore drugs like heroin and MDMA, and they're actually finding that once they remove the shame from doing drugs in the first place, and by legalizing it and making it more accessible to people, that they're actually like solving the drug problem, you know, because it's accessible to people, so they can go in and they can actually get their fix, get what they need, and they're actually finding that people are weaning off of that drug because you're removing the emotion of shame behind it. You're making it more accessible for people to feel okay about it within themselves. So then that in and of itself is going to help someone with an addiction. Spirituality and new age thinking that we're all falling into. So say like law of attraction, astrology, numerology, psychics, mediums, all those things are completely shameful and scapegoated in our society, like tarot readings and all of that, which I always think it's really fascinating how kind of like hypocritical, which is interesting, narcissists are hypocritical, but how religions in particular, people in religions will tend to shame or scapegoat or even make fun of people that are into spirituality or new age or that type of thinking. In the religion, they have all of these spiritual beliefs as well, all these miracles that happen, all these things, but they still are so adamant that they are like the one true truth. Now the next one is someone of like a different race. In our society, we tend to, especially here, you know, here in America, we tend to scapegoat and ostracize people of a different skin color. And we can see this everywhere. It's been so long. I mean, we know this with African Americans and with Mexicans and Muslims. We have all these issues around like immigration and all this fear around Muslims. And so you can actually see all of the confrontations and all of the contention that's happening around people of a different race here in this country, which again, look at the core emotion behind that. It's around we're shaming someone for being different than us, and we're also afraid of them. So we're kind of like throwing another blanket statement or generalization on an entire race just for being different and just for having a different skin color. People with a disability. This whole society, they're actually kind of scapegoated and shamed as well. This society that we live in is built naturally for the strongest and the fittest. We haven't really set up a society that makes life easy for people with a disability. And so you can actually see, like, in and of itself, the shame that's based around that. So that's kind of the last one that I wanted to throw out there. There's probably tons more scapegoat things that are in society, but I just wanted to bring up those few, like those examples that kind of I've come to a realization of in my own experience, and just to bring them to light so that you can really start looking at everything in our society and start to see how every single time that we fall into this like trap of and these thoughts that are based around shame, guilt, and fear, it will automatically set up this whole dynamic that's identical to the narcissistic family dynamic that we were raised with, that I would say the majority of us are raised with, and most in particular a light worker. This will be the type of path that they go through. I'm going to make a part 3 of this video. Again, I just wanted to be kind of brief on the scapegoats in society, but the next video I'm really going to merge like all of this together. Like all of it will completely make sense, because I really want to explain the particular path that a light worker is going to be on to really understand what happens when you fall back onto these shame, guilt, and fear thoughts and brain chemicals that get released into your brain. I hope you guys enjoyed the information so far, and I will see you in part 3 of this section.